Wow, we're all having a great time. This is amazing. Especially, this is wonderful for me to experience because this was my bar mitzvah a few years ago. So to hear the Haftorah and the Torah reading with such skill and even more important, enthusiasm. Skill is skill. You have more skill, you have less skill. The enthusiasm, that's what we see here. And the whole family, beginning, of course, with Sadie. So it's really a wonderful thing. It's the same Haftorah every year. And so when you see it repeated decades later with this type of love and enthusiasm, it's a great encouragement. So today, we were introduced to the couple who began it all for the Jewish people. They're, of course, Abraham and Sarah, whose lives are related to us in considerable detail in the Torah. For many weeks now, we're going to be reading the stories of Abraham and Sarah. We know of their love for each other. We know of their struggle to have children. We learn about the conflicts in their family life, their relationships with their neighbors, and their interaction with the God that they chose to follow. They're completely unmasked. It's like being a fly on the wall and seeing everything going on in their family. Now, certain biblical characters have what we would call appellations added to their names. What do I mean? Moses is known in our tradition as Moshe Rabbeinu. Doesn't say that in the Torah. We give him an appellation. Why? He's Moses, our teacher, the educator par excellence. Joseph is known as Yosef HaTzadik. That's not in the Torah. The rabbis gave him that appellation, the righteous one, perhaps because he resisted the tempting offer of Potiphar's wife. So how is Abraham referred to and Sarah referred to in our tradition? Abraham, our father, Sarah, our mother, the founders of the Jewish people. Now, we could take that literally. We could say that Abraham and Sarah gave birth to Isaac, who fathered Jacob, who became Israel, and was the father of the 12 tribes. And from there come the Jewish people. But somehow I don't think that the rabbi is referring to Abraham and Sarah as our father and mother was meant to be a description of our biological link to him and Sarah. And I think I have some proof. When a man or woman chooses to become a Jew, to convert to Judaism, the custom, of course, was we give them a Hebrew name. Now, we all know that a Hebrew name consists of the person's name followed by the son of or the daughter of. What do you do with a convert? The biological parents of the converts obviously are not Jewish. So what do? We say that the man or woman who's chosen to enter the Jewish people is the son or daughter of Abraham and Sarah. But we do more than that. We We say Avraham Avinu v'Sarah Imenu. That's how we put it in the ketubah when they marry. They are the daughter or the son of Abraham, our father, and Sarah, our mother. So that tells me that the rabbis considered Abraham to be not just the physical father of the Jewish people, but the spiritual father, and Sarah, the spiritual mother. I think the rabbis meant to emphasize that Abraham was our spiritual father, and de-emphasize the fact that he was our physical father. And I think I have some good proof for that as well. Was Isaac Abraham's only son? No, we read about it. He had another son named Ishmael. Now you might say, but wait a second. His mother was Hagar, an Egyptian. But in the Torah, in fact, in all of biblical times, the identity of the child came from the father. It was patriarchal, not from the mother. So it doesn't work. Ishmael is born of, we call a Jew, obviously in those days a Hebrew. But what we know about Ishmael is he didn't follow in Abraham's way. He didn't accept Abraham's teachings. He didn't accept Abraham and Sarah's mission. So what happened to Ishmael? He is not part of the Jewish people. In spite of the fact that Abraham was his physical father and it was patriarchal identity, Ishmael, he's out. He opts out. What about Isaac? Isaac had two sons, right? One was Jacob. He's the one we know. Who was the other? Esav. And the same thing happens to Isaac. Jacob, Yaakov, accepts Isaac and Rebekah's belief system, accepts their connection to God. Esav doesn't. Esav is not part of the Jewish people. By the way, that means our ancestors had only a 50% success. We're doing better, right? It's difficult. It's very tough. That's the first thing the Torah is telling us. It is really tough to pass on the tradition. That's why the whole Torah is focused, and all of Jewish life is, how do we pass on this tradition? They started with only a 50% success rate. So my question is this. What was there in Abraham's personality that God deemed him worthy of becoming the father of the Jewish people, and Sarah's determination that made her the mother? The answer, I believe, comes in the very first verse, which we read about Abraham's encounter with God. It's chapter 12, verse 1. So this is what it says. The Lord said to Avram, as Sadie taught us, his name was Avram, not Avraham in the beginning, go forth from your native land and from your father's household to the land that I will show you. Made very famous by Debbie Friedman in that beautiful song. So it's a strange verse, and all the commentators are attracted to it. God doesn't just say to Abraham, leave your homeland and go to Canaan. That would be simple. Leave your homeland, go to Canaan. That's what he wanted him to do. But he doesn't say it that way. First, he tells Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha, leave your land. Then he says, Mimoladecha, leave your birthplace. But that isn't enough. Abraham is reminded that it is Beit Avicha. It's your father's household that he has to leave. In other words, it's his home. It's where he grew up. It's everything he ever knew. So describing the place Abraham was supposed to leave in such detail, reminding Abraham that it is his homeland and his family that he must leave, clearly points out how difficult the thing was in God's eyes, how dramatic the demand was, or the request that he was asking him to do. And let's not forget, Abraham was already on in years at this point in his life. Then the question is, where is he to go? And we know the answer. He's going to Eretz Yisrael. He's going to the land of Canaan. But that's not what the verse says. El ha'aretz asher areka, to the land I will show you. In other words, God doesn't even tell Abraham where he is to go. It's bad enough he has to leave his homeland, but he isn't even given the comfort of knowing where he's going. Right? If you have to leave, you at least want to know that where you're going has a good promise, a good possibility. So that reminds us again how difficult a thing God was asking him to do. But I think there's more to it than that. There's something very strange about the way God makes the request. The verse delineates precisely the place Abraham is to leave. And then it indicates without any precision at all the place Abraham and Sarah are to go to. It's pum farkeret. It's upside down. It's backwards. Abraham already knew very well the place he was leaving. It was his place. He didn't have to be reminded. He knew it. What he didn't know is which place he was going to. In other words, God's main interest is not in telling Abraham to go someplace. That wasn't the issue. His main interest is telling Abraham to leave a certain place. It was Abraham's leaving his homeland his birthplace, that most interested God. So why? Why couldn't Abraham have been the father of the Jewish people in his own homeland? Babylonia was a nice place. It was the most actually educated culture of that period of time. Why couldn't he spread the word about the one God, the ethical teachings of the one God? Why couldn't he do it in his homeland, in Babylonia? He had, as the rabbi said, to teach. He had already argued with his father about his foolishness of idolatry when he was a young boy. So he was already beginning teaching, according to the rabbis, in Babylonia. So the answer, I think, is really quite simple. Before Abraham could understand this new idea, this new faith, he had to separate himself from his environment, from that pagan world. He had to know who he was, what he believed in, what he stood for before he could teach others. And this perhaps is the key. Abraham had to learn that if he stuck to his beliefs, if he followed the way of life, which we call Judaism, he would often be isolated, separated from the rest of society, from the rest of the world. Abraham had to learn that this way of life, this commitment to this ideal of monotheism, to this Jewish faith, would mean that even if he were to return to the place of his birth, he would still be an outsider, because his way of life and his religious beliefs were simply different. That's what it means to be the children of Abraham and Sarah, to have Abraham and Sarah as our spiritual parents. Abraham, as you know, was not called a Jew in the Bible. We're not called Jews until we go into exile. We were called Jews by outsiders. We never called ourselves Jews, but then we adopted it. Jew is from the term Yehudah, Judah. We came from Judah, so the Persians said, you must be Yehudim. You came from Yehudah, we're calling you Yehudim. It's a reference to the land of Judah. What was Abraham called in the Bible? He was called a Hebrew, Ivri. Ivri comes from the word side, to cross over, la'avur, to cross over to the other side. He was called Ivri, the rabbis say, because all the world was arrayed on one side, and Abraham, ha'ivri, the Hebrew, he was on the other side. We're not talking physically, we're talking ideologically. Abraham had a belief in monotheism, and nobody on the entire face of the earth believed that. He was on this side of the river, and they were on the other side of the river. In other words, Abraham was willing to take the unpopular road. There's one God, he said, that God is just. The rest of the world said there are many gods, and there really is no ultimate morality. There is no special dignity and holiness in the human being. We introduced the idea that the human being is holy and created in the image of God. Nobody thought that. In fact, the pagans thought that the gods were created in the image of man. He would call unjust what much of the world called just. He was willing to defend those no one wanted to defend. So we learned two special lessons from Abraham and Sarah's leaving his homeland and going to the land that God showed him. First of all, it reminds us that the next generation of Jews cannot know what it means to be a Jew unless they understand from the very beginning they are different from the rest of the world. It's the first thing that it says in the book of Esther about the Jews. They're different. It was said, of course, as an attack upon us, different in a bad way. But we assert that we're different in a good way. That is why we take them at an early age, our children, and begin their Jewish education. For a period of time, they are separated so they can learn about their Jewish identity and heritage, like Abraham was separated from the environment, his original environment. So when we light candles on Shabbat and holidays, we're separating them from the outside environment. by telling them these days are holy to us. They're special. That is why when they are born and they become young adults, when they prepare to marry or when they celebrate anniversaries, we bring them to the synagogue. We bring them to the Torah to teach them that these milestones are celebrated differently by Jews. The bar mitzvah is a unique ceremony to the Jewish people. No one else has such a transitional moment from childhood to adulthood. And the other lesson is that Abraham ultimately was part of the world, not separate from it. He was worried about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's next week's Torah reading. He separated from the world so he could find out who he was, and then he went right into the world, right into that world of Sodom and Gomorrah if he had to try and salvage it. He fought with God on their behalf. He lived amongst the people of Canaan, and he dealt with them. He even fought with them against evil. And they learned from him, the Torah tells us, and ultimately Abraham became a blessing to them. The Jewish people cannot live separate from the world and still be the children of Abraham and Sarah. But if we're not willing to be different and uphold our special values, special ethical teachings, then like Ishmael and Esav, we just drift away from Abraham, our father, Sarah, our mother, and the Jewish identity goes the way of Esav and Ishmael. So like Abraham, our father, and Sarah, our mother, we are all commanded to go forth, lechacha, to be different, but not apart, to uphold our Jewish teachings, and at the same time, we live in this world amongst the nations of the world. This past year has been very hard to live amongst the nations of the world, seeing so many side with the evil of terrorism, so many identify with Hamas. But we can't retreat from it. Israel will not retreat from it. Israel will continue to be part of the world, to shed light upon the world, to stand up for the values of democracy that we so believe in. That is what the people of Israel are trying to do in the Middle East. That is what the Jewish communities outside of Israel are trying to do. If we succeed, as Abraham and Sarah did, then it will be a blessing to us, and as is said in today's Torah reading, and indeed, the nations of the world will be blessed as well. And we all say, Amen.